Welcome back to Anchor Strength. I'm Natalia, and today I wanted to talk about fear. Have you ever noticed how the enemy uses fear to keep us paralyzed, stuck, and confused, and prevent us from moving forward towards the calling that God has for us? I know that's happened to me so many times, and I've been praying a lot about it and trying to learn how to be prepared to recognize these spiritual attacks of the enemy when it comes to fear. Sometimes God calls us to do something and we get super excited, and then suddenly we start having a thought, oh, what if I don't have the money to start that business? What if I don't have the clients? I don't know if I can finish that project. I struggle with this. I'm not good enough. And then it goes on and on and on. And then you start having more thoughts. And then suddenly this one thing that you were excited about that God gave it, that called you to do, now it's this massive monster in your head and you cannot move forward. And then you feel that nudge in your spirit of God calling you to do something, but you're just paralyzed. And instead of focusing on God and what He's asking us to do, we focus on that fear. And on 2 Timothy 1:7, where it says that God did not give us the spirit of fear, but fear is a spiritual weapon, a spiritual strategy that the enemy uses to attack us and to keep us captive in our own minds. Because the thing is, the devil doesn't have to physically stop us. All he has to do is plant a seed of doubt, a seed of confusion, a seed of fear in our minds, and we stop ourselves. He's so trickery and so mischievous of how he moves and plants a seed. And if we're not aware and if we're not focused on Jesus, we place our focus on that fear and everything else crumbles. And all those things that God has called us to do now are suddenly this monster in our head, because maybe we feel bad because we're not doing what God called us to do. And now you feel condemned. And now you suddenly like, oh, you're not good enough. And there's anxiety and there's depression. There's all these other feelings that start to come from this. And it becomes a massive monster. But have you noticed that once you're able to get through that and you look back and you're like, it wasn't all that hard. It wasn't all that difficult. And you realize how much you maybe missed or how much time it took, and it could have been so much easier. It's like when you procrastinate on something because you're afraid of facing it, and then suddenly you do and you're like, oh, it didn't take that long. Have you ever experienced that? Or am I the only one where I procrastinate on something and then because maybe I just didn't know how it was going to be, or I was afraid of something, or I had this idea in my head that I wasn't going to be able to do it, and then suddenly I do, and it's like, oh, that was it. I could have done this so much easier and not suffer as I did. But the enemy uses this to stop us, to prevent us from walking on what God has for us. And the truth is, the enemy is not worried with someone that's, not listening to what God has to say, that's not pursuing God, that's not going after God's heart and God's purpose for that person. The enemy plants that seed in our heads because he knows that if he can make us doubt and stop from walking in obedience, we're not going to be able to experience that supernatural that God has for us. We're not going to be able to be used as a vessel to expand the kingdom. So all the enemy has to do is to just plant the seed. And how do we know if it's fear or if it's wisdom, right? So if I'm crossing the street and a car is coming and it's driving super fast and I feel like it's coming after me, yes, I'm going to feel fear, right? It's real. The car is right there and I can see it coming. But how do I know when it's an idea, when it's something that's in our head? And I think there's some parts of the Bible, like when we get the descriptions of what the Holy Spirit is, when we understand what the Holy Spirit was sent to do for us, he was sent to be our advocate, not our accuser. He was sent to be our helper. He was sent to be our comforter. He was sent to intervene for us. The devil condemns when the Holy Spirit convicts. Condemns is like makes you feel small. Conviction calls you closer and says, let me show you how to do this. It's love, it's compassion. The enemy, it will make you feel guilt, it will make you feel heavy and negative about yourself. God might teach us things, and sometimes we have to go through difficult things, but God doesn't put us in a position of shame. He's not trying to remind us of our past to make us feel bad about it. He's trying to show us our future and show what he created us to be. And the enemy tries to mix all of these things to confuse us so he will try to stop us so we won't experience what God has for us. Gideon is a good example because Gideon had this identity based on fear. Fear shaped his identity, but God never called him through that identity. He called him through destiny. He said he will be with him, my mighty warrior. And because God already knew that he was going to have victory through that process. So he's calling you through your destiny. He's not calling you by your past. He's not calling you by the way you see ourselves. Sometimes we get so caught up on the lies that the enemy has told us that we forget to pay attention to what God has told us about ourselves. That we're victors, that we're his daughters and his sons. The things that God in private will tell you about yourself, we forget those. And the thing is, the enemy will always try to remind you of who you used to be, of what you used to do. Because the devil cannot speak on your future because your future belongs to God. So the enemy will try to use something from your past to affect you in your present and to stop you in your present and affect your future. But God is going to remind you of who you are and what your future is. So I think one of the biggest things about fear is to understand that difference. So one of the Bible verses that makes me really think about the whole, like, it's a good example of how the devil tries to use fear to stop us as we're walking in obedience is Matthew 14 verses 22 through 33, where it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismisses the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. So there's a request for him to ask something. So then Jesus goes, come, he says, which is now a request from Jesus, which means Peter has to obey or not, right? Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink. Cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. Have you noticed of like how it says that Peter got afraid? He got scared, and for that reason is he stopped. And then he sank. And that's the same thing that happens to us. When we focus on the fear, we collapse. When we focus on the fear, everything fumbles and stops. And that's why we got to keep our eyes locked on Jesus and not listen to these things. And that's why it's like so important to like keep our eyes locked in Jesus. Like, think of like Peter, he got distracted with the wind, and then that allowed him, the enemy, to plant the seed of fear, and now he's sinking. And how often does that happen to us, where God tells us to do something and we get distracted with the noise around us, like what people have to say about that, what could happen, what could not happen, and now suddenly you're sinking and you're not following towards God on what he's called us to do. So I think one of the things that I've been doing is trying to recognize when I feel like I'm getting paralyzed, what's the feeling that's coming from it? Do I have peace? Am I not moving, but I have peace because maybe I'm still discerning something? Or am I just terrified because I feel like I'm not good enough, or because I'm afraid of what people are going to say, or anything that's negative? I think when things come from God, it's filled with peace and joy, even if you don't have all the answers. But when it's coming from the enemy, it comes with heavy feelings like shame, feelings of being small or not good enough, anxiety. And that's like, I think, a good gauge of trying to figure out, if I'm feeling all these negative things, maybe I need to go spend more time with God and ask him to guide me through this, and just be open about how I'm feeling, and ask God to walk me through those issues and to show me how to get out of that place and be able to move forward. And just to like close it out, like, God doesn't expect us to be perfect. He expects us to be willing to move forward, even when we don't have all the answers, even with our fears, even with our brokenness. He knows all of that about us. And when he calls us into something, he's already considered all of these things about us. So don't let the enemy plant a seed, and just how he tries to have this strategy, this spiritual strategy against us. We need to prepare ourselves and fully be ready, and ask the Holy Spirit for a strategy to fight those weapons that the enemy is bringing towards us. So I hope you enjoyed this, and would love to hear about your experience with fear, or anything that you do to fight when you're feeling afraid and you feel paralyzed. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Well, thanks for watching. I hope this is helpful, and I would love to hear more about your experience and how you fight against fear and this, this moment when we feel stuck and paralyzed. And I'll see you next week. Okay.